Have you ever known someone who was your closest friend one day and a total stranger the next? Or perhaps you are that person. You reach a clearly defined point where a switch simply flips inside your mind. You walk away from a deep friendship, a long-term relationship, or even a close family member, and you never look back. There is no final screaming match. There is no desperate attempt at closure. There is just complete, absolute, and enduring silence. In pop culture, this is sometimes called the door slam. It is often celebrated on social media as the ultimate form of self-care. We see endless quotes about cutting out toxic people, protecting your peace, and ruthlessly pruning your social circle. And while walking away from genuine abuse is absolutely necessary for survival, the chronic habit of cutting people off at the first sign of conflict is entirely different. It is a complex psychological defense mechanism, deeply rooted in how we process safety, trust, and emotional overwhelm. Today, we are going to dive deep into the psychology of people who cut everyone off. We will explore the hidden emotional architecture behind this behavior, why it feels like the only option in the moment, and the heavy psychological toll it eventually takes on the person who is always walking away. To understand this behavior, we first have to dismantle the biggest misconception about it. When someone cuts you off, it feels deeply personal. It feels aggressive, malicious, and incredibly cold. But from a psychological standpoint, the act of cutting someone off is rarely about punishing the other person. Almost exclusively, it is about protecting the self. This behavior is heavily tied to emotional bandwidth. Imagine your emotional capacity as a battery. For someone with healthy emotional regulation and secure boundaries, a conflict with a friend might drain that battery by 10%. They have enough charge left to navigate the uncomfortable conversation, set a boundary, and repair the relationship. But for the person who chronically cuts others off, that same conflict drains the battery to zero immediately. They experience interpersonal friction not as a hurdle, but as a catastrophic threat to their emotional survival. The only way to stop the bleeding, the only way to recharge, is to completely sever the connection. This brings us to the profound role of attachment theory in this dynamic. Our attachment styles are formed in our earliest years, largely based on how our caregivers responded to our needs. If you find yourself frequently cutting people off, your attachment style is likely the invisible hand guiding that decision. People with a dismissive-avoidant attachment style are prime candidates for this behavior. If you grew up in an environment where your emotional needs were ignored, minimized, or treated as an inconvenience, you learned a very specific survival rule. Relying on others is dangerous, and independence is the only safe harbor. As adults, dismissive avoidants value extreme self-reliance. When a relationship begins to demand heavy emotional labor, or when someone gets too close and threatens that fierce independence, the avoidant person feels trapped. Cutting the person off is the quickest escape route. It is a swift amputation to save the rest of the body. Then, we have the fearful-avoidant, sometimes known as the disorganized attachment style. This is incredibly complex because the fearful avoidant desperately craves deep intimacy, but is utterly terrified of betrayal. If you have this attachment style, you likely have a hyper-vigilant nervous system. You are constantly scanning the horizon for signs that someone is going to let you down, abandon you, or hurt you. When you perceive a slight, even a minor one, your brain sounds a massive alarm. To a fearful avoidant, cutting someone off is a preemptive strike. The subconscious logic is simple and tragic. I will abandon you before you get the chance to abandon me. But attachment styles are only one piece of the puzzle. We also have to look at the cognitive distortions that allow someone to walk away from years of history in a single afternoon. The most prominent distortion at play here is called splitting, or black and white thinking. Splitting is a psychological mechanism where a person is entirely unable to hold opposing thoughts or feelings about someone at the same time. In a healthy dynamic, we recognize that human beings are complex. We can say, I love my friend, and they have been incredibly supportive, but they were also very selfish yesterday. That is emotional nuance. When someone engages in splitting, nuance disappears. People are categorized as entirely good or entirely bad. When you are on their good side, you are idealized. You are the perfect friend, the flawless partner. But the moment you make a mistake, cross a boundary, or trigger an insecurity, the switch flips. Suddenly, you are entirely bad. The psychological brain literally wipes the slate clean of all the positive memories, and focuses exclusively on the threat you now represent. Because the person is now viewed as entirely toxic or unsafe, discarding the relationship feels logically and morally justified. There is no guilt, at least not initially, because in their mind they have just eliminated a villain from their story. This leads us to the anatomy of the cutoff itself. To the person being cut off, it almost always feels sudden. It feels like a bolt of lightning out of a clear blue sky. But clinically speaking, a cutoff is rarely sudden. It is the final explosion of a very long, very silent fuse. People who rely on the cutoff as a coping mechanism usually have a profound inability to communicate their boundaries in real time. Instead of saying, "Hey, it hurts my feelings when you speak to me that way," they say nothing. They swallow the hurt. They absorb the slight. They act as if everything is fine, but internally, they are keeping score. They are silently deducting points from the relationship. They build a wall brick by silent brick. And eventually, the other person commits an infraction that places the final brick on the wall. The threshold is crossed. To the person being discarded, the punishment wildly outweighs the crime. They think you are ending a 10-year friendship because I was late to dinner? What they don't realize is that they aren't being cut off for being late to dinner. They are being cut off for the hundreds of unspoken grievances that have been quietly accumulating for a decade. Paradoxically, this is why highly empathetic people are often the ones who execute the most brutal cutoffs, emotional sponges, people pleasers. And those who lack rigid boundaries often absorb so much of other people's pain, toxicity, and demands that they eventually hit a state of absolute emotional bankruptcy. They give and give and give until there is nothing left. Because they do not know how to advocate for themselves through healthy conflict, their only method of self-preservation is to vanish. But what is the true cost of this behavior? Modern internet culture might reframe cutting people off as a glamorous act of protecting one's energy, but psychological reality tells a much darker story. The long-term toll on the person doing the cutting off is profound isolation. When you use the door slam as your primary method of conflict resolution, your world inevitably shrinks. If your requirement for staying in a relationship is that the other person never triggers you, never misunderstands you, and never makes a mistake, you will eventually find yourself completely alone. Human relationships are inherently messy. They require friction, rupture, and repair to grow deep roots. If you run away at the first sign of rupture, you never get to experience the profound intimacy that comes from successful repair. Furthermore, chronic cutting off prevents psychological growth. When we constantly remove people who trigger us, we avoid looking at the trigger itself. Why did that comment hurt so much? Why did that minor rejection feel like a fatal blow? Other people act as mirrors reflecting our unhealed wounds back to us. If we constantly smash the mirrors, we never have to look at our own reflections, but we also never heal the wounds. We simply carry that exact same unhealed trauma into the next friendship, the next relationship, and the next workplace, repeating the cycle of idealization and sudden discard over and over again. So, how do we break this cycle? How do we find the middle ground between accepting genuine abuse and ruthlessly cutting everyone out over minor infractions? The journey begins with recognizing that discomfort does not always equal danger. Our nervous systems are ancient, and they often react to an uncomfortable conversation with the same adrenaline response they would use for a physical attack. Healing requires learning to sit with the discomfort of conflict without immediately reaching for the eject button. It requires learning to take deep breaths, regulate the nervous system, and realize that a disagreement is not a death sentence for the relationship. Secondly, it requires the terrifying act of communicating boundaries in real time. It means retiring the silent scorecard. If someone hurts you, you have to give them the opportunity to correct their behavior. You have to say, "I need you to stop doing this," and then watch how they respond. If they respect the boundary, the relationship grows stronger. If they repeatedly violate it, then walking away becomes a healthy, conscious choice rather than a panicked, reactive defense mechanism. Finally, healing requires letting go of black and white thinking. It means accepting that good people can do bad things, and that loving someone means holding space for their flaws. It means recognizing that you too are flawed, and that you have likely hurt others in the exact same ways you have been hurt. Protecting your peace is important, but true peace doesn't come from building an impenetrable fortress and living alone inside it. True peace comes from developing the emotional resilience to navigate the messy, beautiful, and sometimes painful reality of human connection. It comes from knowing that you are strong enough to handle conflict and that you no longer have to run away to survive.